Good day. My name is Dr. James Weldon, or Yogadhi, and this is the ongoing episodes and sharing of my autobiography. And this is actually a conversation of the second book that I've written, which is not fully in publication yet. But you can see some of these chapters on the original version of this book called The Secret Journey to the Enlightened Mind. And I'm sharing about my first trip to India and the experience of me going home and what it's like and what it was like for me to be around with this really great high consciousness being, this great teacher who is now the founder of actually the largest community spiritual organization, NGO in the world. There are literally tens and tens and tens of millions of people involved here around the world. But this is going back to the early 1990s, 1992, my first trip to India. And I've been at the retreat center in Bangalore. It was very small at that point. Just a few people were there. And I've just spent 4.5 months there and completed my first book writing project, actually, of Sri Sri's book. It was called God Loves Fun. And some really, really cool things happened while I was there. And, here on, there will be all kinds of great stories. Those of you that like great stories of things that may have happened around this great spiritual teacher, I'm sharing many of those now. It's one of the most fun things that I do, sharing the stories. And if you ever do have a chance to come visit us in our community, I'm speaking from our community here in Boone, North Carolina. It's on over 1,000 acres. It's actually the largest such community, at least facility-wise, directed towards higher consciousness, really outside of India, I think in the world now. And it's the major headquarters of the Retreat Center for the Art of Living. Here, I live in my house right down the road. I'll talk about that later. My house is actually the original meditation hall. There's a whole amazing story how this all happened. I'm not there yet. I'm actually living in Colorado, and I've made my first trip to India now. So I've been in India 4.5 months, and now it's time to end our visit. But we still have a few things to do, and Sri Sri has now completed that book, allowed me to complete that book, God Loves Fun, and now it's 20,000 copies of that has now gone out for the first time. I didn't realize there are going to be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of those books written. And we really love Bangalore. It's really a tremendous town. And one of the things we have to do before we leave is shopping, which happens to be my wife's favorite pastime. And we also want to see what's called, see the palm leaf reader. There was a really very, very famous one called Shukadeva. Shukadeva was one of the masters in this tradition. Those of you that have taken the program called the Puja class, he's one of those, Shukam. And there's a whole pretty amazing story about him and what he created, long ago. And we were suggested, Sri Sri actually suggested that we see him. And Ram and I decided to complete our trip here, and we've done everything. We're going to try to do almost everything in one day. We're going to do this palm leaf reading, and this comes from a source which is literally thousands of years old. It's from the Vedic writings of Sri Shukadeva. Now, understanding the Vedic Shukadeva palm leaf reading really takes some explanation. It's going to stretch your mind a little bit, those of you that have heard of these. Of course, I see many of you are from India, so maybe you know this. But part of the reasons that I'm writing this is to help provide a bridge in understanding of the potential experiences to understand that, there's a lot we don't know. There's really a lot we don't know. It's me and you. And the Shukadeva Foundation is in Bangalore, India, and it's the home of one of these palm leaf readers and records of this tradition. And according to the legend, I think 4,000 years ago, a very enlightened saint, Shukadeva, and his students dictated a large number of messages to a group of pundits, sages, to write down. And the sages wrote down these messages on palm leaves. There was no paper back then. And the leaves were then bound into small books for safekeeping. And later they were copied and distributed to the ever-widening family tree of Shukadeva. And I talked about some of my memories of my past that I actually was having. And as over the years, this skill has grown over the years to include sometimes innocently knowing about others' past as well. So I can't tell you how, but it's just the consciousness has the ability to know. Read the earlier chapters of some of the book where I talk about that specifically, about the pragya. Those of you know about pragya and the pragya programs that are being taught to children. This was a gift that I had received. Now I know from Sri Sri way back when I met him when he was 20 years old. Really, really amazing. So I know something about my wife's past lives, and I know something about mine. And how this knowledge can come is really a mystery, but it just does. I'm not claiming total accuracy because there's no way to prove it. How do we know things like this? Anything is really a mystery. Look into your mind and you'll see that this is so. How do you recognize that you're seeing me on electronics? I don't know. You just know. In exactly the same way, this is a characteristic of the truth, what's called the truth-bearing consciousness. In Sanskrit, it's translated as Ritabhara Pragya. It's talked about in the Yoga Sutras that anything can be known in greater and lesser detail as this spiritual awakeness gradually dawns. And at a particular stage, the details actually, maybe, hey, Paul, the details of maybe the future can be known as well. I don't know how this happens, but it just does. In truth, divine consciousness, the divine consciousness actually is beyond time and space. In some way, it's kind of like owning a television with an infinite number of channels. And you can just turn to a certain channel and kind of see what comes up. And if the consciousness is established in this state, you test. You actually can know to see if it's true in detail. It's an indication of some kind of attainment, but it's much, much more than just imagination, and it requires the ability to actually be nobody and nothing in the state of awareness on a very high, innocent plane of consciousness. And at the same time to be able to entertain the most delicate of thoughts. And we now know that awareness is the doorway to all-knowingness. There is an omniscience, all-knowing state, or at least one thing. So think about this. You can type something into your computer and something will come up. And so I guess you could say in the field of consciousness, once this state becomes more stabilized and clear, you can type anything into that and something comes up. And the message in the palm leaf readings of Shukadeva apparently contain important details actually of the future lives and maybe the karmic patterns of many individuals. Now I know that actually during the earlier ages, a lot of things which are much more difficult are now were much more available. 4,000 years back, Krishna had just passed away 1,000 or so years before, and a lot of these more advanced states were more available. We're coming out of that now, but somehow this sage knew it. And Sri Sri has actually talked about it. There was a class that he was doing for his students, and when he'd test them to see if they could pick up this kind of information, he'd verify it. And when individuals would come for readings, would go to his descendants, they could actually look in here, and in the future somehow they knew. And according to the legend, for generations, people from all over the world would come just to receive their personal history from this very old 4,000 or 5,000 years, I guess it was 4,000 years, record of Shukadeva, a long time ago. And the books are archived according to the date, time, place. I really don't know how they do it, but one has to, in order to do that, this was actually the teacher, the person that actually made the huge predictions about Sri Sri when he was a child. I won't go into that, but his father went to try to see a little bit about Sri Sri. And one must call the foundation. It still exists there in Bangalore. And actually there are many individuals that do this all throughout India. The question is, how good and accurate are they? And some of them are more accurate than others, So one must first call the foundation to see if there's something, they have something in the records. And you give them your name, your date of birth, and they will kind of look and see if, and then you'll get an appointment with the Sri Sukta Nadi interpreter. It's a well-documented fact that these palm leaves are really very ancient manuscripts. I'm assuming they were copied, obviously, because they were sent to family members, descendants. And most spiritual teachers in India really do endorse their authenticity. The only problem is occasionally arises in the accuracy of the interpretation. I don't know. I think this is because the records are written in a very ancient, I think it's Sanskrit, and sometimes in a kind of a code, and the terms do not always reflect the terms of modern society, I guess. So Ram and I contact the center there, and are told there's a record of the palm leaves for both of us. And the individual that did the reading for him, his name is Ganjar Sachinananda Murthy. He's the latest in the line of the Sri Sukta Nadi interpreters in Bangalore. Since then, he's passed away, and his son continues to do that. He gives us a time to meet. And apparently my record indicated not only the day, but the time we would meet in the present date. Wow. And I ponder the possibility that possibly some sage, some rishi, thousands of years ago could actually know such a thing. It boggles the mind, and how you could get a sense of how I felt. I find Ganjar's office to be really nice and spacious. It has kind of the feeling of a little bit of a musty kind of holy library. And as I enter, there's a poster of his father, an older interpreter, hanging on the wall. And I wonder, maybe this is his former teacher, and it permeates the space. Later, I learned that his father had passed away. Now, the story goes, hopefully I'm right here, that Pittaji, Sri Sri's father, received readings about his son in his childhood that predicted the worldwide growth of this teaching organization, and his position as, now the title of my book, The Rise of the World Teacher, one of the foremost spiritual force in our age, in the world. This is what I'm talking about. And I understand that there may be some skepticism about this. I completely and totally understand from a few people. But, even many years later, Sri Sri still occasionally does consultations with him as well. And when I ask if my wife and I should have a reading, he encourages privately to do that. So Ganjar, the interpreter, begins with a reading with me stating that this is the date that we were supposed to have the reading. And quickly I hear many actually accurate details about my life. Some of these confirm the 3 spiritual teachers I would meet. He said, these are the 3 teachers we'll meet. And it also details some problems and accomplishments that I would have in my life. And the record even tells how long I will live. And Sri Sri is mentioned here in these readings as the word just used, my final and true heart master. And he confirms that we've been together, a host of lifetimes, which now I'm remembering over time, and I will be sharing some of that, some of that. Not right now, but later on. Actually, there's a 3rd book after this one. Most importantly are confirmed some of the details of my past lives, especially about Tibet that I'd already recalled clearly, and also are curious details on enlightenment that they don't make sense to me. And he says at the end, amongst other things, you've attained God consciousness in the past, but is now hidden because of a curse from a guru in that time. And, who knows, I mean, in the West, we do have psychics and things like that. I didn't know. I had confidence, but who knows? But I had been working on this book, these works, and I want to ask about that. So I'm writing the book here, and he says there will be at least 3 books. And someday, this book will be important and really well received around the world. And that's not happened yet, by the way. We'll see. In particular, I'm happy that he confirmed the details of my memory about Tibet. In the future, he predicts for me the events, and some of the things he talked about did turn out to be completely true. You hear the last chapters. 12 years later. So, now, although at that time I really have serious doubts about these details. And my wife's reading is not quite as detailed as mine, but, it also talked about someday she will have a decision to stay or leave in this world. And everything is not revealed to her at this time, and she actually needs to come back later and for a future reading. Now is not apparently the time to reveal the part of that record for her. This is what it said. And although I was certainly happy with the reading, there are some details which were impossible to verify. And several days later, after completing our readings and more shopping, I checked for my arrangements for my flight back home. And to my amazement, Sri Sri is also leaving town the day after my flight. And although my date and his date were set, I didn't know, 6 weeks ago. I said it 6 weeks ago. He's leaving the day after. And my wife actually wanted to stay a little bit longer in the country and go down to South India and be with some of her friends in Kerala and travel kind of on her own. And she wants some independence. Let me take a little sip here. I'm getting dry. She's feeling the need for a little bit of independence and travel time on her own with a friend of hers. And for some reason, I've been feeling nervous about this, a little bit nervous about this over the last 6 weeks. I feel some concerned about the trip, but I don't know why. It's just that I feel if something potentially very unpleasant might happen. We traveled many times back and forth to town from the ashram, and sometimes we travel on commuter buses. They still have those buses. You know what I'm talking about. Completely packed. And something about the trip really bothers me. And so I speak with Sri Sri about the trip. And later that day, I have a chance to talk to him about, finally, about the reason I went to India was about this land that John McAfee had offered me, 40 acres in Colorado. I felt destined, really, since I was a childhood, that someday I might be part of really creating a great center. Where I'm staying right now, I had no idea of this place. So that's part of the future story. I'm in Colorado, and after 4.5 months, I finally get that question out. And he says, yeah, go ahead. You can try to see if you can do it there. And 2 of my friends, very close friends, Wally and Carolyn Zeman, old timers, are at the ashram as well. And they're in the room. And should they ask if it's okay for them to move to Colorado and see if they can help on this project. So with that meeting complete, I leave Sri Sri's small home, the small Shakti Kutir, and pack for the next day's flight. And as the door closes, you guys, if you've been there, you've probably been up there, and look at his little bitty small porch, that little tiny porch. There was no gate around it. There was no, I planted some of those trees around there that are so overgrown all around the ashram. And I remember the many nights that we would sit there watching the stars, out on the porch. He would do his talk, and a few of us would sneak up and they'd go, he's not going to talk to anybody. We'd kind of hang around a little bit, knowing that may not be the case. And then 2 or 3 of us would kind of sit there, and he'd come out with a really small, teeny stool, sit there and meet with us, sometimes quite a while. And often I waited at that door to see him. And during all of those times, I felt no need to go inside. For me, just being at the door was enough. To me, that, small curved door represents my secret journey to the enlightened consciousness. And I say to all of you with open hearts that if you can find the door where the enlightened mind lives and dwells, if you find that, it's enough. And if you bang on that door, you will find that it will open. It's already open. And that for many of you, this is my prayer to all of you, really, that your dreams will be fulfilled. We have to go through our stuff, but it was also settled at that meeting that in spite of my misgivings, and I did have some, that my wife would stay in India for a trip south to Kerala. And she wanted to go to some of these fabulous Ayurvedic health centers and do massages and lots more shopping. There was no giant Ayurvedic clinic there in Bangalore. There was a few practitioners, but none of that was, no hospital, no university, no colleges, none of that existed. And I'm overweight, my bags are completely full. And it's quite interesting here that during this conversation, when she would ask him, he would say, no, if you really want to go, you can go. But actually, Sri would say to me, ask her, to go ahead and go home. He would tell her to go home, but he would tell her a different thing. And I'll talk about that in the next segment, I think. But somehow I wondered this problem would sort itself out. I really was uncomfortable. But on checking my itinerary going home, I actually discovered that my first stop before I fly out was to go to Malaysia. And I've never been to Malaysia before. And I packed, and I'm on the way to the airport. And I mentioned the details of my Malaysia friend of mine at the ashram. I think it was Ashish. And I think he's now one of the Swamis and so forth up in the northern India. I think it was Ashish. I said, I don't even know Sri Sri's itinerary. And I was asking around. And anyway, that person says, oh, don't you know Sri Sri's going there the day after tomorrow? He's going to Malaysia. And I discover at the last moment that I'm going to fly into Malaysia one day, and Sri Sri is going to arrive the next morning. And I realized this can't be a coincidence. And so that evening, I fly into Malaysia. And the next morning, I get up, I stay overnight, and I go out to the airport, and I meet Sri Sri in Malaysia. And we travel all around Malaysia and another country, and just for us, just traveling around in the car together. Really an amazing time. By this time I'd been in many meetings with him, and I'm much more comfortable, not so shy. Compared to the few meetings that I'd had with Maharishi, I consider myself so much more than blessed. The chance to travel with just a couple of people with Sri Sri like this, to me, obviously, you guys know now, was absolutely precious. And I spoke about some of my funny obsessions about his sandals in the last segment, and his asana, and how he gave me an asana of his. There's really very little else that I could be attached to. What else does a guru have? He has sandals, his asanas, and maybe what he's wearing in clothes. And then the only other thing is that a being carries with him actually is called his dhoti. And the dhoti is, made of silk in his case. And it's usually a large flowing cloth in a couple of pieces. And the bottom section wraps around his waist in the front. A second piece falls and is wrapped around his shoulders. And he usually sometimes wears a t-shirt underneath. And people at that time, some of the Westerners were just beginning to come there asking about this and other things. And he says, Sri Sri says, the reason I wear this and the beard and all of this, because this is my uniform. In India, it's kind of the clothing of a spiritual teacher. And once we asked Sri Sri about his clothes, and he replies, I could wear anything. It doesn't matter what I wear. All of this is not for me. It's for the people. Perhaps it will help them recognize me when they come to see me. And if they see this uniform, this is his words, I wear, it will help them recognize me. And so now I'm sitting in the car behind him, and we're driving across Malaysia. And for absolutely unbelievable period here, and we're driving all the way across, all the way along to the very end of Malaysia. And this trip is to meet a group of people that are actually not even involved with Art of Living. This group is opening a new ashram retreat center, and Sri Sri has been invited to come to kind of inaugurate that. Anyway, I'm in Boone, North Carolina, and there's a big center here. And as soon as we arrive in Malaysia, we're driving all the way there, about 4 hours just to inaugurate the center, and for him to give his blessings and to wish them the best. And I find it's absolutely incredible that he would make this trip for a group that he apparently really doesn't know very well. But I learned that, this big consciousness, the enlightened mind, really works in ways the rational mind does not easily understand. Somehow he knows by intuition that there's a need at this center, and he never would spare his physical comfort ever to fulfill these needs. And those of you maybe that have had the chance to travel with him, and as he goes around the world, he visits so many countries around the world, I don't know anybody that could keep up with him. And he doesn't, his physical comfort doesn't matter. And on the way back, as we go 4 hours, we inaugurate this and we're heading back. There's actually an advanced art of living course with about 40 people scheduled on the other end of Malaysia. So instead of staying overnight somewhere, Sri decides to drive the car all night long on the other end of the island to start this program. He wants to be there when everybody arrives in the morning. So as he drives, he's sitting in the front. He's sitting in the front beside the driver, and it's 2 a.m., and we've been driving for a number of hours, and I'm sitting in the seat right behind him. I've been in India now almost 5 months, driving on those crazy pothole roads. At that time, all the way the 23 kilometers out to Kanakapura Road. It was really a rough drive. But driving in Malaysia at this time is in heaven and compared. And I'm riding in this car and the wind is blowing through the stillness of the night and the windows are partly down. And the top of Sri's dhoti, is actually just, I'm sitting there and it's waving in my face over the back seat. And just take a moment, and hopefully, place yourself in your heart, and I'm sitting in the back seat here and we're riding along. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning and this dhoti is waving in my face, and Sri leans back, in front of me, sleeping or meditating, I'm not sure. And I'm watching this little dance of this dhoti waving in front of me. And I'm absolutely mesmerized by the movement of this, and, it's waving and my hand is slowly creeping across my lap towards this waving silk, and nobody's watching. And by this time, I've hugged him a few times, and there's always, tremendous energy and love. And there's a great picture of that embrace in the book. And I think back over my life, I've waited so many years, really, honestly, my dear friends, this entire life, how many more, I don't know, to have the opportunity to be this close to an enlightened being like this. I don't realize now, of course, that it's going to be this big as it's become today and the future. It's what I've prayed and longed for years. And here I am just a few inches away from the greatest consciousness I've ever known. And I could imagine, really honestly, I couldn't even imagine anything bigger, greater than this. And as I was sitting there, I said a sankalpa. I said a vow, okay? Said a vow. There's a whole mystery with sankalpas. I won't talk about that now. And I was thinking now, by the grace of God, I've been given the opportunity to grab hold of this, the dhoti of this saint. And I will do so now, and I will never, never let go. I'd met a number of good saints in my life. Really, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was a tremendously great being. And he sent me on to be with his good friend and the tradition, Guru Maharaj Vilasananda and Muktananda. That lineage of learning bhakti yogi By the way, I did meet Prabhupada, the Hare Krishna Guru, on my trip out to California to see Maharishi long ago. I'd met several. I didn't meet these. And I was really not able to really recognize what I saw. For now it had been 24 years. And each one had gradually led me to another. And now I'd found this third, saint is not a big enough word. My true heart master, who had been with me really, and now I know from really the beginning of this. Difficult to explain. This is the time. This was my time. And I promised myself that I would grab onto this opportunity. I would never let go. And whatever happens from now on, whatever appearances may be, this love, this truth, capital T truth, is my home. And as these few minutes march by, my fingers continue to inch slowly towards Sri Sri's dhoti. Again, I'm in the car and it's flapping in front of me. And finally, with a short movement, this short movement, this 3, 5, or 6 inches, it's taken me a lifetime to complete. And I finally grasped the dhoti that was been waving in front of my face now for hours. And as I grab this dhoti, I get a shock of Shakti. Electric. It's like I put my hand on a socket. And I'm a little bit surprised by this. I'd felt this energy and I thought, well, this is great. This is incredible. And again, I set my intent again, and I think, okay, I spent all my life finding you. And now that I've made my way here, now I found this place, I am never going to let go. This is where I belong. This is where I'm going to be. This grace is what has given me so much greatness through my entire life. So there's a picture in the book of me actually holding on to the dhoti. Okay. He actually ends up giving me the dhoti, but that's another story. At this moment, as Sri Sri sits there, he shifts a little bit in his seat. A little bit. When I had touched his dhoti, and he turns his head just slightly, and I see him looking back just over the corner of his eye. And he glances back at me with a little flash, and I see a little twinkle in his eye. And even though I'm on the other side, I can see this smile. The corner of his mouth, a little grin spreads over his face. And as I hold on to this dhoti, gradually, like somebody turning up the dimmer on an electric light bulb, turning up the switches, this Shakti, this energy, flowing through the silk kind of turns up another notch. And the energy flows down my arm, more like an electric current. And I'm sitting there going, wow, this was nice a few minutes ago, but now it's really nice. This feels great. And then the next moment it gets stronger, warmer and warmer and warmer. And a few minutes later, I'm thinking, that was nice. This is much more better. This is really, really nice. Now 3 really nice. And as hard as it is to believe, after about 45 minutes, the energy is so intense that every cell in my body is just illuminated. And still, the power continues to increase. And after a while, it's now beginning to feel what you might experience by maybe placing your hand on a frying pan and someone turns up the heat, or maybe you're holding on to a little battery, but now the battery was really strong. And eventually enough heat in the frying pan, reflexes will take over. And so I was determined I wouldn't let go. And I'm going to override my reflexes. I don't care how intense it gets. This is what's going on in my mind. Just enjoy this moment, because it's really kind of comical. And I'm thinking, no matter what happens, I'm going to hold on to Shishi's dirty. And after an hour and a half, another 45 minutes, I'm holding on. The energy is so strong, I swear, I cannot hold on any longer. He gradually turned it up higher and higher. I couldn't take it. I couldn't take it. In the United States, we have these cartoons. Maybe you've seen them in India and elsewhere. And in the cartoons, maybe someone will get shot or someone will get electrocuted, and you'll see these bolts of lightning, or maybe steam will come out of their ears and everything. If this was a cartoon, I would have had lightning bolts coming out of my ears. This moment is literally more physically and spiritually intense than anything I'd ever experienced. And I thought that I'd had something quite strong. If you read the rest of this book and the earlier part, you'll know that there have been some things, really intense things. But at this moment, traveling along in the middle of the night, I just couldn't hold on anymore. I couldn't take anymore. And in spite of my best intents, I had to let go. And so finally, I sit back. If this was a cartoon, it'd be one of those where steam were coming out of the ears and the eyes are going, doo, doo, doo. I don't know if you've ever seen some of those cartoons. And, I sit back and I'm totally cooked. My body feels like a piece of burnt toast. And during those several hours, I was fried in bliss consciousness. And by this time, it's about, 4 in the morning, and she shifts a little bit. Almost if nothing has happened when I let go. But he glanced back and looks playfully at me, and then gave a little wink and a nod, And as we pull in, like, you have no idea. Yes, it's true. I have no idea what we're dealing with. Yeah. Honestly, I need to tell you all, my dear friends, we have no idea what we're dealing with. In all humility. I hope this is my prayer, that perhaps these words will give you some inspiration and confidence. This is your reality too. Okay, fine. So what happened to Yogadhi? It doesn't matter. It's gone. But we pulled into a gas station to refill the tank. And of course, I'm totally full, and he turns and smiles and he looks at me and he says, "Oh, would anybody like to drive?" And at that moment, I feel like Superman. I feel like I could do anything, Superman. I feel it would be possible for me to just kind of soar off into the sky. I felt like if I wanted, I could do that. And this was my chance to drive Sri to drive his car for the first time. And happily I jump out of the car and I jump into the front seat, and later seeing something much deeper than happening to me during those hours. And I appreciate you continuing to listen to this special segment here. What happened that night was so powerful at that time, it was impossible for my mind to comprehend, to understand. I came to see that she was ready to give me all that I could take and more. As simply as one might pour water into another container, she literally poured herself into mine until I could take no more. At this time, this was another gift of grace that I was given, in addition to so much which has come before. And when I finally let go of his duty, I simply could not take any more. And I was quite sure, and I now know, I'm absolutely sure there's so much more there. And this is another part of my journey with Sri Sri that I did not understand for years. At that moment, I was willing to ride behind him for all my life, but I was recently told a new sign that would come. You know, something new would come 12 years down the road. What that was to be, I did not know. I can't guess. So, you know, with this excitement, and I'm feeling so full of it now, you know, and even though, you know, some of you were spread out around the world, please drop down into the heart. Be in that space. In that space, there's no distance. We all live as close to that reality, closer than our own breath. It's our very life. It's our very existence. You know, this world is big, is nothing. And in that space, there's no distance. There's no time. Go to that place and soar. You know, the story here continues that it'll continue to fill us. Hopefully fill those of you that have had the fortune to be connected with this wisdom. You know, it's time for me to let go. And then something new will happen. Something would come. Would somebody like to drive? He said. And I find myself in the front seat with him driving on my own. I still have a picture of his dhoti, of him wearing this as a reminder. So I'll let you go. So this is thank you for taking the time to listening to the story and continue. This is episode 32 in my second book, entitled The Rise of the First World Teacher. And I don't speak those words lightly at all. I don't speak them casually at all. It's chapter 3 of my second book about me going home to India. I'm not heading back. It's the second book, but it is available. All of these things are available online, on YouTube, all my sharings of this. There's 32 of them now or so. And if you're curious about it, go back and listen to some of the earlier ones. You'll enjoy that. And you can also pick up this book up to this point. There'll be a new title to it, but it's going to be launched later this year. But most of this is in my old copy of this called The Secret Journey to the Enlightened Mind. And thank you for taking the time to be here, Paul and other friends that are listening. Ajay and Krishna and Pradeep and Chandra and many others that are listening from around the world. I invite you to come back and join me again. I'm continuing these ongoing sagas and these adventure stories. The next one will be coming up this Saturday. There'll be 2 episodes on Saturday, 2 on Sunday in a couple of days. So thank you. Go out and do some good and contribute. Because what we're talking about, this is your life and your energy. And, you know, these things that I've passed through, you know, don't compare. It's not, you know, it's not required. But perhaps I passed through all of these so I can help provide a bridge. You know, we're very young in the West in terms of our understanding. And honestly, there has never been, to my knowledge, any yoga or spiritual teacher who has actually completely laid everything out in terms of what they passed through. You know, I love the great teachers, so many of them in the history, but, you know, in the West, we're really young in our understanding of this, and hopefully this work will help provide a bridge and understanding of the possibilities of the enlightened consciousness. Again, this is episode 32, chapter 3, part 3, about my first trip to India and my autobiography. You guys have a great day. Namaste. And again, I have to say, may the divine awaken in you. That's what this word Jai Guru Death means.